The meeting of the Community Development Commission to order on July 13th, 2016 at 6 p.m. We're in the council chambers of the Woodell City Hall. Roll call, please.
Chairman Roy Tsai.
Here.
Ron Damasco.
Here.
William Milano.
Here.
Richard Peterson.
Here.
Rick St. Marie. George Vant.
Here.
David Woods.
Here. I declare quorum present. The purpose of this meeting is commissioner training. So I'll turn it over to Kelly to give a little synopsis, and then she can handle the program.
Very good, thank you. So one of the reasons why we wanted to have this training is because we're welcoming 2 new commissioners, and just to make sure, and we also have a new planner, so we just want to make sure that we're all operating on the same assumptions and expectations as far as what the role of the Community Development Commission is, as well as what the role of staff is, and so everybody has the same understanding as to how we need to operate. But before we get into some of those details, I want to give a general overview of just the planning framework that we're working in. And so I have a couple quotes here for you. And this is more of a, in the planning realm, if you fail to plan, then you're really planning to fail. And then the second one is really, if you don't know where you're going, how do you know when you've actually arrived? So planning has a number of components that really is the reason why we plan in the first place. Ultimately, it helps us to establish and set directions and then establish priorities. It gets everybody on the same page, much like we're trying to do with this training session, but it brings together various stakeholders and helps everyone to have a basic understanding of how the community needs to move forward. In terms of decision making, it actually simplifies decision making, because a lot of the decisions or a lot of the recommendations that will come out of the CDC will be largely based on those planning efforts that we have done previously, or that, as we continue to refine those efforts. It allows us to align our resources. So if we have a master plan, for example, well, then we can take our regulations and make sure that those regulations help support the goals in that plan. It also allows us to help allocate funding for helping to achieve those goals, which is also something very important. If you want to actually achieve them, you've got to have a way to make actionable progress with that. And then it also communicates the message, not only within the city as a group of staff and elected and appointed officials, but also with the public. And planning is a very public process. There has to be public input as part of it, because ultimately many of these plans, and specifically the land use or development planning that we do, has to do with how we see the community in the future, and really how are we going to get there. So being able to bring that in as all part of the process, and then being able to communicate what the end result of that is a very important component of the planning process. When we, and I should say that this is not intended to be a one-way conversation, so if at any point anybody has any questions or comments, please, we can just have a dialogue, because this really is supposed to be something where if you're unclear on a certain point, we can just go ahead and address it at that point. It's really not intended to be like a formal presentation. So in terms of comprehensive plans, and to give a general framework of planning, comprehensive plans are general in nature, and they look at the community as a whole. They look at various aspects of the community and how those relate to one another, because you cannot affect, if you make a decision that affects transportation, then it has residual effects on other aspects of the community. And so a comprehensive plan is intended to look at the community holistically and help guide future decisions based on how those pieces interact with one another. Neighborhood plans are a little more specific, and they really deal with a smaller geographic area. They can get a little more detailed as to maybe some implementation elements or things like that. They can be integrated into a comprehensive plan, but typically they're sort of standalone plans. Regulations help to support those planning efforts by putting your like technical requirements or restrictions, limitations on perhaps different areas, different uses, and so we'll get into a little bit more about those regulations. It also, the building code is also another type of regulation to help us achieve those goals. And then design guidelines are another piece of the planning puzzle, if you will. They're typically encouraged suggestions, and we can see it in areas where it's typically limited to a geographic area, and it's typically intended to maintain a particular character of development. So if, for example, you have a street where perhaps there's certain architectural styles or elements or a character that is really unique to the community, then design guidelines will help identify what those unique characteristics are and encourage people that are redeveloping a property within that area to stay within that character. But they're not necessarily regulatory. They could be, but they're typically not. They're typically just suggestions. In terms of what a comprehensive plan is, I did talk about the fact that it is comprehensive and overall citywide. It is a long-range plan, typically about 20 years out is kind of the typical time frame. We have, there's been a lot of communities because, once you plan for 20 years out, things are bound to change within that 20-year time period. And so what I've typically seen is that on every 5-year cycle, revisiting the comprehensive plan and just seeing if any of your assumptions that the plan was based on has changed and whether or not that may affect. So it's not necessarily as if you redo your comprehensive plan every 5 years, but maybe revisit it to see if there's any outdated items or things that may need some tweaking, and so then you can update at that point. But it is general, so the specifics about a particular area wouldn't necessarily be in a comprehensive plan. That may be something that you would reserve for either a corridor plan or perhaps a neighborhood plan. Physical development is really the focus of a comprehensive plan. It has to do with land uses and how they interact with an adjacent land use and where development should be concentrated, or transportation network or infrastructure, for example. Those are the types of components that you would see. It's a way to align the community goals with your policies, and our current comprehensive plan does actually have some development policies in there. Sometimes they're goals and objectives, sometimes they're called policies, but this is the way to try and align those. And it's also a policy instrument. Probably, I think just a few months ago, we recommended, or actually I should say that the council decided to remove the comprehensive plan as a regulatory document that was actually codified, and now it's a policy guide. It's intended to guide development, but as I mentioned, sometimes things change very rapidly, and so what's in your comprehensive plan that you've done for a 20-year time period, things may change so much so that if a development comes in, it should be consistent with the intent of the comprehensive plan, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it may exactly match up because of changing conditions. And so this is why it's supposed to be a policy guide and not necessarily doctrine, not necessarily where you have to match up every single thing that's in there. Our comprehensive plan, this is a photograph of, or an image of the cover. It is from 1997. The Community Development Department is actually preparing a request for proposals to update our comprehensive plan. And so you will all be involved in that process. Currently, it's just trying to identify what consultants might be able to provide us with this update. So as we move forward, you'll be hearing more about that, and we'll go through the public process. But specifically, we have typical comprehensive plans have these major components. A SWOT analysis is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And ultimately what that means is it's just an evaluation of your current conditions. So it identifies, what are the strengths of your communities? of your community? Where are the weaknesses? What can be improved upon? And then what are those sort of external forces that may affect how you develop your community? So for example, the western access for O'Hare. Well, that's going to have a major impact on the development or redevelopment of the city. And so that's going to be something that we're going to have to take into account as we're preparing our comprehensive plan. So these are the things that that are involved in that. But then there's also, as I mentioned, there's the vision, goals, and objectives. And sometimes those are identified in development policies or policy statements as part of it. Other times it's just identified as, we want to maintain the current character of our residential neighborhoods. And then there's certain objectives as to how you would achieve that goal. There's always a future land use map. That is one of the major components of a comprehensive plan, and I've got an image of that I can show you. There's typically a housing component as part of that, and your residential neighborhoods and perhaps maintaining character or building character into those neighborhoods. Infrastructure, public utilities, transportation, bikeway plans, all of these are aspects that are typically included. And then oftentimes there's recreation or social elements of the plan that are brought together. And so as we look at that, here is our current future land use plan. And this then just identifies, not necessarily, it doesn't reflect what is there currently. This is an identification of what we hope to see in our 20-year time period. And so this may be one map that may change within, if we're evaluating every 5 years. There may be some minor tweaks depending on, like the Elgin O'Hare Expressway, for example. Well, that has a major impact as to what uses we may put next to it, as opposed to just being Thorndale Avenue. This is an example of the evaluation of our streets. Would you do me a favor and shut off the light? I'm sorry, I thought those were off. But this has to do with an evaluation of our existing street network and identifies sort of the, nope, wrong one, I think it's over this one. And identifies the sort of use classification and how frequently they're used and sort of their capacity in many respects. And so this then also affects the land uses that you would put adjacent to it. You typically don't want to have where you've got a major arterial, for example. It's probably not the best idea to put single-family homes directly off of that, because that means those are going to be your heavily trafficked roads, and it's going to be more difficult for somebody to be able to pull in and pull out of their residential property. This is just another example, proposed truck routes. So you look at existing conditions and then you try and come up with solutions to how to address future conditions and based on your future land use as well. And then here's an example of what we've got now for transportation system improvements. Where a new street might potentially go. And again, this is a guide. This is not law. So, we often hear concerns from property owners that say, well, your comp plan shows that you've got a street going right through my house. Well, that's not necessarily going to occur. It could, but there's a lot of things that have to happen between the planning stage and the actual execution phase. So, like I said, it's a guide. It's not necessarily going to happen, and usually these are, because they're general, it doesn't necessarily mean that where we show a line on a plan, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's where it will go, because there's other factors in terms of engineering and other aspects that may affect where a proposed road will go. And then bikeway systems, so we look at the regional system, and then we also look at within the city, what does that look like? How can we connect? And that's one of the main aspects that we would look at for emergency services, for example. Where can we connect roads that don't currently connect so that we don't have dead ends or cul-de-sacs where, we do have an example of Potter Street. If any of you are familiar, we've got a Potter Street that's here, another one here, another one over here, but none of them actually connect to one another. Well, from an emergency management standpoint, that's somewhat problematic. There's not that connectivity. I don't know that that necessarily means we need to connect them all, but I'm just, for the sake of pointing out some of the challenges, that certainly is a challenge. And then this is just our facility and utility plan, identifying existing public facilities, looking at schools as well, looking at the library district, looking at all of these public services and how they may relate to the overall planning efforts. And this is another point that I'd like to make, is that we do want to make sure that the library district, the fire district, all of these other municipal entities, or I should say, they're not municipal entities, they're quasi-governmental or governmental entities that are within our planning area, are involved in our planning process. We don't want to exclude anybody or plan in a bubble, right? Because everybody has sort of these individual plans, but where we come together and really coordinate our planning is really where we're going to be more successful in creating a vision that's achievable. Now, when we start talking, so that the 1997 plan is our comprehensive plan. That is currently what we use and what we evaluate. When you see the staff memos that say that it's consistent with a comprehensive plan, that's really what we're evaluating it against. We do have some corridor or neighborhood plans. This is the comprehensive plan supplement, but it's largely a corridor plan. If you can see here, we've got areas that have been identified as sort of strategic areas of development or redevelopment. And so this is from 2003. It's a little bit more recent, but still this will be something that will be looked at as we do our comprehensive plan to see if we continue to just combine it or if we keep it separate. Then we have, in 2009, the Thorndale Corridor Master Plan was adopted. This was also a public process, but this is sort of I wouldn't necessarily say it's a neighborhood plan, more of a sub-area plan. It's very large. So here is the result of that plan in terms of what the intended vision is for this area. And so this is Wooddale Road, and then here's the Elgin O'Hare Expressway. And just for anybody, I'm just going to give a quick recap as to what this plan is, because I know that not everybody was on the commission at that time. There were three elements that were the reason why this plan came to fruition. The first one was that the Elgin O'Hare Expressway was being planned. The second was that there was discussion about the western access at O'Hare. And then the third was, and the reason for some of the land uses in here, is that there was intended to be a transit connection in the middle of the Elgin O'Hare Expressway right-of-way that went straight to the airport and to that western terminal. And so only one of those anticipated activities is occurring currently. But the plan consists of a main street. It's a corporate main street. It's intended to have mostly office, hotel. There's mixed use where there's commercial and possibly, office on the second floor or multifamily residential. But it's intended to be a dense main street that is with a variety of uses, easily walkable, pedestrian friendly type of street. It's in many cases it's intended to be similar to what a traditional downtown is, and this would be created just parallel to the Elgin O'Hare.
Excuse me, when was this plan formulated?
It was in 2009 that it was adopted by council. Mm-hmm. Then there's another component, which is the business park, which is similar to the uses that we currently have in this area. But they would actually be consolidating some of the consolidating some of the smaller properties, trying to have larger spaces. Currently, what we have in this area, for anybody who's really familiar with this, is we've got very small lots, smaller buildings, shorter ceiling heights, which somewhat limit the potential tenants that can go into the space. They're also a bit older, so they could be outdated in many ways if they haven't been kept up in terms of, the ceiling height is a big one for industrial uses, but there's certainly other improvements that could make some of these buildings more usable. But the fact that, the goal is to have larger spaces, because that's one of the areas that we're lacking in the city, is somewhat a mid-sized industrial space. And these are intended to be more flex space, more tech-oriented, could be offices, but again, this is a plan. It's not set in stone, so it's intended to be a guide. The other aspect of this plan is a recreation complex. And so this area is intended to keep the existing junior high and then relocate these ball fields, which are currently oriented north-south, and orient them east-west, and have an area for stormwater detention. This is originally planned to be a recreation center, and I don't know if that will come to fruition, but that's what was identified in the plan in 2009. There's also one other component to this, which is the Wooddale Road sort of corridor. And with the Elgin O'Hare being constructed, as soon as you get off of Elgin O'Hare and you head south, this then becomes the sort of welcome mat for the city. And so some of these uses, as you can see here, they're grayed out. They're not intended necessarily to change as part of this plan, but some of the other ones are. And again, it's a plan, it's a guide. It doesn't necessarily, I mean, we've got zoning regulations that limit what can go here or not. So I just wanted to kind of quickly run through that. Does anyone have any questions about this? I know that this may be the first time that some of you are seeing it, but it's important to understand, because a lot of the development that we're going to, or redevelopment of this area, will need to be largely supportive of this plan. And this area is all part of the tax increment finance district. So there's public dollars that are available to property owners that want to redevelop in this area. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind as we're looking at any potential redevelopment within this area, because we will evaluate it against this plan.
Will there ever be a monorail system going into O'Hare Field from the west?
If the western terminal is constructed, then there will be some form of public transit. At this point, we don't necessarily know what that will look like, because we don't know if the western terminal will be constructed. It's uncertain at this point. However, there is space allocated in that right of way for some form of public transit to go in. In 2013, the city adopted the Wooddale Vision Plan. And so this plan is largely for the intersection of Wooddale Road and Irving Park Road. And so we are currently right here, and then this is basically the area of the study. And so what this calls for, and as you've been seeing, commercial has been realigned as part of our intersection improvements. And so that creates a larger sort of green space area. This is intended to be some sort of garden area. Then there's also a pavilion that's planned. This is a barn, which is intended, it's actually originally intended to be, I don't know if it was a relocated or a new component of the Historical Society. There was some attempt to try and coordinate with the Historical Society on having some element that may be more of a draw for people instead of their current location. Then we have the beach, which is intended to remain as is, or perhaps, there's no change proposed in this plan. And then there's also a park area, which is an adventure park, which was the original proposal here. So the only real changes that we've seen to date have been the realignment of commercial. There has been some additional acquisition of property in this area, and as I mentioned, with the comprehensive plan that we're looking at doing, there may be some future discussions on this area where this plan may need to be updated or modified as well. So as I mentioned, a plan on its own is actually not enough. We do need to be able to regulate development to help support the goals and the vision that's been identified in these various plans. And so we have our Unified Development Ordinance. The reason that it's a Unified Development Ordinance is because it includes zoning regulations, subdivision, and stormwater regulations all in one. It's intended to be more encompassing than having these individual ordinances. Currently, they're separated in different articles, and we are trying to go through the UDO and help to reduce any inconsistencies or eliminate any inconsistencies, and trying to limit where the regulations are and maybe just referencing so that it's a little bit easier to use. We also have the sign code, which is not part of the UDO. I know that we just went through and revised the sign code, but that is a separate chapter in the municipal code, and that is under the purview of the Community Development Commission. And then the building code is another way to regulate development. That, however, is not subject to CDC review. But when permits come in, we do review against not only the UDO and the sign code, but then also the building code. And largely that's public health and safety.
All right.
And now I will turn it over to Sean.
Thanks, Kelly. Oh, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry,
No,
can
go
I
ahead.
add one other thing? In terms of regulating developments, there's one aspect that we didn't necessarily talk about, and that is annexations. Annexations are not, we don't have any local codes for annexations. We do follow state statute in terms of annexations, and if somebody just wants to voluntarily annex, they'll just take the petition and we'll go straight to the city council. The CDC doesn't have a role in evaluating that unless there is a zoning request as part of it. And so we've had some annexation and rezoning cases that we've heard, and that's why those are in front of the CDC. But generally speaking, it will go directly to council. And just for the sake of explaining this, there is a potential to have a public hearing at the city council level in the event that there's an annexation agreement. So if, for example, we have a property that's coming in and they want to annex, rezone, they want a special use, and they want an annexation agreement, the matter would come before the CDC. We would discuss the merits of the rezoning and the special use, and then the CDC would make its recommendation and forward it on to council, and then council will hold the public hearing for the annexation agreement and consider then the zoning relief that came before the CDC. But there's two separate processes that would need to occur in that instance.
Okay. Everybody knows me. I'm Sean, the city attorney for the CDC. First thing I want to do is thank everybody for coming out tonight, and I particularly want to thank everybody for serving on this commission. In my humble opinion, I think you play one of the most significant roles in the city because you're really shaping the character of your city, not only for folks today, but for generations far down the line. So thank you for your service. I know you all have regular jobs, and you're taking time out of your busy day to serve the city, so thank you. I want to really emphasize my role, Ms. Chrissy's role, Mo Khan's role. We are all here to assist you. That's our job. We are your assistants. I'm the legal assistant. Kelly will be helping you with all the nuts and bolts questions on zoning matters. So if you have a question, please don't be shy about contacting us. You can first contact Kelly to keep the meter low. If Kelly says, well, this is raising a legal issue, Kelly can contact me. You're free to contact me directly, but I'd encourage you to see if Kelly can help you first, and then she'll talk to me. And so just know the lines of communication are very open. We see it as our job to help you. So please know that. What I'm going to do for you is just sort of give you the nuts and bolts of your roles and duties. And I know for most of you this is going to be a review, but we do have some new members, so I think this will be definitely helpful for the new members. As I'm going through it, if you have a question, stop me. I will go off script, and whatever question you have, please ask. That's why I'm here tonight. Okay, so for our first slide, the CDC, Community Development Commission, is what's called a recommending body. Everything zoning starts here. And this commission does all the heavy lifting with zoning. And ultimately, this commission makes a recommendation to City Council. And City Council has the final say on the zoning issue. But the City Council is really going to look to what happened at the commission level, because that's where all the evidence comes in, the testimony, all the facts come in here. And so they're really going to be looking to you for your determination. They may not always agree with your determination. If they don't get upset. They can choose to accept or reject your recommendation, but that doesn't mean this body doesn't have it. Again, in my opinion, the most significant role in zoning, because this is where the rubber hits the road, right here. As the city attorney, we're an appointed officer of the city. We advise the board on all legal matters, all legal questions. During the meeting, I'll sit next to Roy if Roy has procedural questions. He may be whispering over to me. Just know that he's just asking, okay, what do we do next with a matter of procedure? And I'll let him know. Okay, we also have on the staff level, we have the Community Development Director and Assistant Director. The Community Development Director is Ed Cage. Ms. Chrissy is the Assistant Director, and for all intents and purposes, Ms. Chrissy is the boots on the ground with everything zoning. So, again, any zoning questions that you have as you're going through your packets, don't hesitate to call up Ms. Chrissy and say, hey, I don't understand what this means or what that means. She is, how long have you been here now, Kelly?
About a year.
About a year. In my year of experience with Kelly, she knows this UDO back and forth. And she's pointed things out in the UDO to me that I said, oh, that's interesting. So she's very knowledgeable on all zoning matters. Mostly what staff is going to do is they're going to take in the applications for the zoning relief. They're going to vet those applications, make sure they're full and complete, and then they're going to make a staff memo where staff makes a recommendation to this body. And just like the City Council, this body is free to accept or reject the staff recommendation. But in my experience, so far with Ms. Chrissy, her recommendations I think have been very solid, very based on the actual provisions of the UDO. So just know there is definitely some deference, I feel, that you can give staff because they know their stuff in this area.
Well, and if I could just add to that.
Mm-hmm.
One of our responsibilities as staff is not only to accept applications from, a resident, a business owner, a property owner, but really to work with them, because in the event that there's an opportunity where they don't have to necessarily go through the public hearing process, we will try and help them find a solution so that they don't have to spend the money, so that they don't have to ask for zoning relief, because the goal is to try and get compliance with the regulations we have. If there's a problem with the regulations we have, then we need to try and address that. And so that'll be another process that Sean will get into a little bit. But our job is really to help facilitate the process for the applicant and allow you to be able to make a decision with as much information as is available. And, I know we've had an instance where we had to continue a public hearing because a petitioner wasn't able to provide sufficient information by the time we needed it. And I think that we've addressed that issue, but there are sometimes circumstances where we try and work with the applicant to make sure that we make the deadlines, because we have legal requirements for the hearing notices and things like that. And so while we try and work with the applicant, sometimes it doesn't always work out. So while we're helping to provide you with the information, we're also trying to help the applicant understand what the process is and help facilitate that process with them. So just so that you have sort of a better understanding, we don't necessarily just take in applications and move it forward. We actually try and work closely with the applicant to make sure that they understand what it is that they're getting involved in, and whether or not there's an opportunity for them to just comply with the code maybe in a way that they hadn't considered before.
So this slide that I have up, I think if you pay attention to any slide, this is the one to pay attention to, because this is mainly what this commission's going to be asked to decide. These 4 types of zoning relief. The first one's called a special use. The second one's called a variation. Third one is amendments to the text. And the fourth one is rezoning, or I believe the code calls it reclassification. So I just want to talk briefly about each one, just to kind of give you an overview of what these are. When somebody comes to this commission with a request for a special use, what they're saying to this commission is, this particular use that I want this commission to recommend is actually allowed in the code. But the code requires us, as opposed to just doing it, the code requires us to come here for permission. And then this commission will recommend, they'll say, okay, yes, we recommend permission. It'll go up to the city council, and the city council obviously has final say on permission. But it's and I want you to remember this, it's a use that is allowed, but only with the permission of the city. Okay? The second one is variation. A variation is different. A variation is you can't do it under the code. Not even with, it's not allowed. It's just not allowed. So when an applicant comes here, what they're saying is, listen, will you please make an exception to the code and let me do this? And the standards for a variation for that reason are very high, because ultimately if this board recommends it and the city council approves it, what they're saying is, yeah, it's okay, you don't have to follow the code. So I know from working with staffs in all different municipalities, when they get requests for variations, they get very tense, because they know this is a sort of a special, really special relief, because it's this commission saying, yeah, forget about the code. You have a circumstance, a special circumstance, where we're gonna give you an exception. The next one is amendments to the code. The standard for amendments, actually, believe it or not, is very low. All that has to be shown is that the amendment is rationally related to a legitimate government purpose. So the standard for amendments is low. That's why you'll see sometimes staff saying, as opposed to doing variation after variation after variation in a particular area, why don't we just change the code? Because we'd rather say you can do it either by special use with permission, or you can do it as permitted, than time after time saying, yeah, you don't have to follow code, yeah, you don't have to follow code. So you'll see that, particularly when there's variations on the same subject over and over and over again. The last one is reclassification or rezoning. This is where a property, for example, is zoned R1 and wants to become R2. the standards there aren't too terribly difficult as long as you can show that that's appropriate in the location. So, and again, staff on all four of these things will be making recommendations to you, and with reasoning. They'll say, listen, I don't think you should because A, B, C, and D. Okay, this next, some of these other things, they're a little bit less common, but you may confront them, so I just want to cover them real quickly. Someone may come to you for a application on subdivision and or consolidation of lots, amendments to the city's comprehensive plan, and occasionally, and I think Kelly touched on this board will review the comprehensive plan or review the UDO to say, listen, do we need to make some wholesale changes? So that's another thing you may be asked to do. Kelly touched on this next one, to hear and review all zoning and planning aspects of proposed annexations. Sometimes when there's an annexation together with it, and I think we had one recently, there's a request for zoning relief. And I think in the recent case it was reclassification of property. And then the last is a catch-all, is to hear all matters that the mayor and city council, zoning related, refer to you. It may happen from time to time. I can't remember the last time that happened, but under the code, it's authorized. Okay, and I just touched on this. These are the standards for the relief. So for a text amendment, the standard is the amendment, is it reasonable and does it bear a relationship to public health, safety, morals, or welfare? It's very low standard. When code provisions get challenged in the court, I would say 95% of the time the plaintiff loses because it's not difficult to tie a zoning provision with a legitimate government purpose. Okay, the next one are the standards for the special use. And I'm not going to go through each one, but I will tell you this. For a special use and for variations, it's absolutely important when the petitioner comes before you, if they say anything else, that they talk about these standards. Because if they come before you and say nothing about the standards, you really can't recommend zoning relief. Because under the code, it says you have to satisfy these standards. So every once in a while, you may see me say, well, to the applicant, have you covered your standards? Because if they don't, it makes your job impossible. Again, if they say anything else, they must address these standards. Yeah, go ahead.
And one of the things that we do as part of the application, and you've seen it in our staff memos, is we require them to submit a narrative where they have to address the standards in a narrative format. That way, in the event that during the public hearing they don't specifically identify each one, they have already addressed it for the commission. And then the other thing that we do is we also evaluate those standards as part of our memo. Whether we agree with the petitioner or not, we will provide our assessment of how they meet or do not meet those standards. And so then you have that information so that you can review it and determine if you agree with our findings or if you agree with the applicant's findings, and then you can discuss it amongst yourself and determine your own if you disagree with how we've analyzed things.
All right, then this next slide is just a continuation of the special use standards. This next one is variation standards. And I am going to focus on one of the standards, and it's called the hardship standard. And it's probably the most misunderstood standard in zoning. And Essentially what hardship is it's a unique circumstance that's not created by the applicant's own making. So a classic example is, somebody has a piece of property, IDOT comes in, takes a portion of that property because they can by law, as long as they give reasonable compensation. And then that changes the layout of the property so that they may become what's called non-conforming. Their property may no longer conform because a big chunk of it's been taken away. So when they want to do a construction project or something like that, it's going to be hard for them to get a permit because folks may say, well, you're not in compliance with the code. We can't give you a permit. In that instance, they may come in here and say, listen, can you make an exception to this rule for me, because it wasn't my fault IDOT came in and took part of this property. So it's a very high hurdle to overcome. And again, it's all because what this commission would be saying and what city council would be saying is, we're giving you an exception to our code. You don't have to follow the code. If there are circumstances when it applies. But I guess if there's any message that I'm giving, it's just be real cautious when a application for a variation comes in, and you can really scrutinize those. Yeah, go ahead.
If I could jump in here too. A lot of times, what I've seen is variations for hardships relative to the property itself. I've seen those as pretty common, where perhaps there's some really steep terrain, and so in order to develop the property that already had a legally established lot, they may have to shift the building over where they maybe wouldn't meet a side yard setback. So they shift it so that it becomes a developable lot. Might be another example of that. But as I mentioned before, especially with variations, we always try and work with the applicants in advance to see if there's some way that we can comply so that they wouldn't have to come in and request a variation. Two other items is that, financial hardship is not necessarily what's intended by this hardship standard. It really is because it's transferable basically from one property to the other, which means it runs with the land itself, is that it doesn't have anything to do or shouldn't have anything to do with the particular tenant, shouldn't have anything to do with their financial positioning. It really does need to be specific to the property itself. And then, the other thing I would just mention is and ultimately as a recommending body, you don't have the ability to make the final decision on this, but just as you make recommendations, it's important to remember precedent. So when you set a precedent and you allow a variation or recommend approval of a variation for a particular circumstance, anybody else who has a similar circumstance should be then allowed that similar treatment, right? And so if you're granting a variation for something, you want to make sure that all of these are evaluated and are met, all of the standards, because if you are going to sort of allow this exception, and there's multiple properties that could have this exception, then perhaps you may want to look at maybe we change the code. Maybe we can modify the code so that we don't have to have all of these exceptions, because if any of you have been through this process, or at least having seen it here, it is quite a process for a typical homeowner, for example. So maybe if we make a slight modification to the text of the ordinance, maybe we wouldn't need to require these variations.
And I just want to piggyback on something that Kelly mentioned, and I know what she means by the word precedent, but precedent actually is a legal term. And one thing I will say is, as a matter of law, one decision this board makes on a case is not binding as a matter of law on another case. But Kelly's point is very well taken, that what that applicant's gonna say is, well, hey, you gave Joe Smith the variation, my thing's exactly the same, what's the difference? You know, why not me? So there's a real practical effect there, but just know as a matter of law, every case is unique. So a decision in one case, you're not absolutely required to make the same exact decision in another case, because the next case may be a little bit different in terms of the facts. So that's just something I want to make clear for the commission.
Excuse me, would that be something, let's say it was almost identical, or it was identical. Would you be able to say to us prior to the meeting, say, hey, we've been through this already, and this is identical to a prior hearing? We have that information beforehand?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely.
Because
Yeah.
we don't want to make that mistake, because,
No.
again, there may be a slight difference
Yeah.
that we're not really.
Yeah, and again, that's a great question. As you're going through the packet, and if you can't do it earlier in the day, because I get it, everybody has a job, and you have to do it before the meeting, just pull us aside and say, hey, I've been looking at this. Have we done this before? Has this happened in another circumstance? And I think both of us have been here long enough to have some working knowledge of what's been granted in the past. Now, if it's going back 10, 20 years, I may have to consult one of my colleagues, but yeah, please do. Actually, we welcome those questions.
Yeah, but we get the packet out a week ahead of time, so there should be, you've got ample time to, if you have any questions, to get them all sorted out before the meeting.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is just generally how do the commission meetings go when we're doing a case? We've got a case before you. And just as a general matter, and there's always exceptions to the rule, there's going to be a public hearing portion of the case, and then what's called the public meeting portion of the case. In the public hearing, that's when the applicant puts on all of their evidence. And the evidence can be their testimony, it can be their documents. Staff will provide some testimony on the application. There may be members of the public that want to speak on the application. They'll be sworn in, and their testimony is evidence. The applicant may bring witnesses, and they'll be sworn in, and they'll put on evidence. Every member of this commission, during that time, has the ability to question whoever has given evidence, even a member of the public. You know, if for example, a member of the commission is a little bit concerned or skeptical about testimony of some member, you can ask questions about that. So you can ask questions of anybody who's offering testimony. You can ask questions of Kelly. That's your opportunity to think of it almost as like you're the Supreme Court up there and you're asking the questions. That's your opportunity to do it. At some point, when all the evidence is in, the public hearing portion will be closed. When that public hearing is closed, you can no longer ask anybody questions, because that's it. That's the end of taking of the evidence. The public meeting portion will be open, and then that's when all the members deliberate amongst each other. That's when you have the discussion. Is this a wise thing to approve? Is it not? And so the members will be talking about it in that scenario. You can read that. Okay, if you remember that one slide I told you to pay close attention to, these things are coming up again. It's these requests for relief that require a public hearing. And again, what I mean by public hearing is taking of evidence. So it's the text amendments, special use, variations, and then rezoning. Go ahead.
One thing that I think is maybe helpful is if there are public comments on a particular matter. I know that I've been to plenty of public hearings where residents are very passionate about different things. And one thing that may be helpful is, particularly when there are standards of approval, is try and sort of ask yourself, how does this help me, or how does it detract from or help support any of these standards of approval? Because while unfortunately, you know, we may get some emotional testimony, it may not actually be valid to those standards that you're evaluating, and ultimately that's what you're evaluating, is whether or not they've met those standards for approval. And so if there's something that you know, whether it's the public or a petitioner, if they're providing some testimony that you're questioning whether or not it may be relevant, you may want to ask them a question about, well, which standard do you believe that they have not met? And that way you might be able to better discern whether or not it's something that is relevant to, you know, sort of basing your decision, or if they haven't, because sometimes there are just neighbors that don't want certain development to occur next to them, and it's more emotional. So you may want to try and frame it in such a way that you're evaluating the standards with their testimony.
Okay, so as you know, Mr. Sy is your fearless chairman. Mr. Sy, Chairman Sy, runs the meeting. That's his role, to make sure there's an orderly meeting. If there's disorder in the audience, he'd call the audience to order. He starts the meeting, he'll adjourn the meeting. Many times what Roy will do is say, do I have a motion for this, or do I have a motion for that? And then a member can make that motion. So he really is, for lack of a better term, the quarterback of the commission. We use what's called Robert's Rules of Order to give you an idea. This is Robert's Rules of Order. We use a very abbreviated Robert's Rules of Order, and it's to give you a thumbnail sketch. Robert's Rules is basically just the procedural rules of a meeting. When, you know, motions, different types of motions to be made, how are they seconded, roll call, things like that. So, you know, in a typical CDC meeting, there'll be a motion with a second, and when there's a second, that opens the floor for discussion on the item. And then there's discussion. Once the discussion's over, typically Roy will call for a roll call vote, especially if it's on approval of some, you know, request for zoning relief. The common motions I have here: a motion to recommend approval, motion to table. What that means is, if for example, the applicant's just not ready to go forward that night, for whatever reason, something came up at the last minute, there'd be a motion to table the case to the next meeting. There's motion to recess, motion to continue the meeting, motion to adjourn. Those are our basic motions.
One thing I'd like to bring up with this is that in the event that, say, you know, I'm on the commission and I make a motion to recommend approval, someone seconds it, and then there's discussion, and I change my mind, I can actually vote against the motion. So these are some things to think about, because just because a motion is made, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to vote that way. It's more common to continue on if you've made a motion to recommend approval, but the flip side of that is you could make a motion to recommend denial, and go that route as well. So, and I know that for certain for, I think it's a text amendment, and is it rezoning maybe, where you have to have a certain number of votes in order to actually have an affirmative recommendation. Otherwise, it's noted as a denial if the motion doesn't carry as an approval. So, is it rezoning or just a text
I
amendment?
think it's variations in text.
Okay,
amendments.
variations in text amendments.
Yeah, Kelly raises an excellent point. Really, the purpose of making a motion and getting a second is just to get the item on the floor for discussion. That's the whole purpose of it. So you could theoretically make a motion to approve, there'd be a second, there's discussion, like Kelly said. If you hear the discussion, you say, well, wait a second, maybe I don't want to approve. You don't have to vote to approve. Okay? The other thing that happens typically is motions are amended. And I'll give you a classic example. It'd be a motion to approve the special use, just as proposed by the petitioner. There's a second, there's discussion, and through the discussion, there seems to be a consensus that, yeah, okay, we'll do that, but we want maybe 2 or 3 conditions. So what you can do at that point is have the motion amended to include the conditions. That's a way to handle that situation. And then, so the motion's amended by the original maker, and there's a vote on the amended motion to approve with conditions. But I'll be, again, my role is to be there to help the commission with those procedural items. Okay, I have some other, I call them helpful tips. The first thing is this thing called ex parte contacts. Here's what that means. If you have a petitioner with a pending case that's going to come before you next week, what you want to avoid at all costs is having contact with that petitioner about the case outside of public view. And the reason is because you want all of your deliberations to happen here in this room. You don't want to get any information that somebody else on the commission doesn't have. Okay, so you want to avoid that. If there's a petitioner with a pending case, and they call you and say, hey, you know, I want to talk to you about the case, say, hey, I appreciate it, but you're going to have to tell me everything about the case at the meeting. Okay.
Yes, I have that ethics training every year. And
Okay.
some of that is in there too.
Yeah. Yeah,
So that eliminates the magic lunch, right?
that's right. That's right.
Well, and ultimately, staff's responsibility is to make sure that you all have the same information with a staff memo, with the, documents provided by the petitioner. And if anyone's engaging in these ex parte communications, then one commissioner or a couple commissioners may be privy to some information that may not be divulged in the public setting, which then may sway votes. And ultimately, everybody should be basing their decisions on what's presented at the public hearing. And so, whatever information in the packet or presented that night is all part of that sort of public meeting.
The next one is conflicts of interest. And, the classic case, and I'm going to pick on Chairman's side. Let's say Roy has auto yard, and he needs some sort of zoning relief because he wants to improve the yard. He files an application. Roy cannot simultaneously sit on this commission reviewing his own application. That'd be a classic conflict of interest. So in that instance, Roy would recuse himself. And when the members, when you feel like you need to recuse yourself, the procedure is you would step down from what's called the dais, and you can just take a seat in the audience or leave the room completely. I would suggest leaving the room completely. here's what I'll say about conflicts of interest. They can get there can be many gray areas with conflicts of interest. The instance I gave is straightforward, but they can be very confusing and very gray. And so I would strongly encourage, if you ever feel like you could even possibly have a conflict of interest, that's a time when I'd encourage you to call me directly, because your communications with me on that issue are privileged. So if you feel like that, don't be shy. You can call me. Your communications are privileged. They don't leave the discussion between you and I. And I always say err on the side of safety, because what you don't want is later down the road, somebody in some court case says, well, hey, this person had a conflict of interest, they never disclosed it, and they would seek to invalidate the zoning relief if it was granted on that basis. So please call me if you ever feel like there's a conflict of interest issue. The last one's impartiality. All that means is you're on this commission to be fair and give everyone a fair hearing. And if you feel like you can't, for whatever reason, if there's a personal reason, whatever, if you feel that you cannot be impartial, you must recuse yourself. Because as a matter of due process, as a matter of constitutional law, you're required to be impartial when you're sitting and passing on a zoning matter. Okay, the next thing is the Open Meetings Act. This commission is subject to what's called the Open Meetings Act. Essentially, it requires the CDC to conduct its business in public and give the public the opportunity to be informed as to the business of the CDC. And I need to really cover this next point because it's often confused by members on the public body. What is a meeting? A meeting is defined as any gathering, whether in person, by video or audio, telephone, electronic means, email, or other means of contemporaneous interactive communication of a majority of a quorum. Here's what a quorum on this commission is 4 members, right?
Yes.
All right, so 4 members is a quorum. A majority of a quorum is 3 members. So 3 members cannot out at a restaurant somewhere talk about a zoning case that's pending before the board. Can't do it. That violates the Open Meetings Act. Okay, so the rule of thumb there is if it's a zoning case, talk about it in this room. Talk about it here.
And staff is not included in that.
Right.
Staff is not included in that. So if, as we've been saying, if you have questions in advance, you can always call staff.
Okay.
We're not actually part of the public body, so feel free to call and ask us questions.
All right, so the general requirements of the Open Meetings Act, all meetings are required to be public. They must be held at a time and place that is convenient to the public upon proper notice. There may be an instance, I've seen it happen in other communities, I haven't seen it happen here yet, but it could, where you get a zoning matter that's so contentious that everybody in town wants to come to the CDC meeting. If that's the case, this room can hold a limited number of folks. If we know, most of the time you know in advance whether it's going to be a big turnout, you have to hold it at a place where everybody can attend. If you have people spilling out and they can't get into the room, can't have the meeting, because that would violate the Open Meetings Act.
What about in the other room with the television? If you had you had the overflow crowd go, say, in this room, and there was a television
And they can
feed.
watch it televised?
Yeah,
No,
no? Oh,
no. They have to be able to be
Phys-
in person.
physically in this room.
Physically in the room.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I've seen it happen where sometimes zoning meetings have to be held at the school in a gymnasium because it's that contentious of an issue. But we generally know if that's going to be the case, and so we'll make arrangements for that. But sometimes it sneaks up, it's a sneak attack, you don't know, and you have to cancel the meeting if you just don't have the space for it. Yeah.
Well, and I will say, so if there's multiple items on the agenda, and there's one particular hearing that draws the crowd, then you would likely continue that public hearing to another date, and then the location will have to be determined, but the remaining items on the agenda will be able to be heard, and you could continue with those, but you would just need to make a motion to table the matter or continue the public hearing, open it and then continue the public hearing to a date certain, so that we can make arrangements for a larger facility if that's indeed the case.
And I know just about everybody knows this, but if we don't have a quorum for a meeting, that's why Kelly will do a call out to see who can make the meeting. If we don't have a quorum, at least 4 members at the meeting, we can't have the meeting. There is a recent change in the Open Meetings Act, which says any public body at a public meeting must allow public comment if a member of the public wants to comment. That's even if, let's say we don't have a hearing. If a member of the public came tonight and wanted to make a public comment, as of right, under the Open Meetings Act, they can make a comment. No member of the commission is required to respond to the comment, but you do have to allow time for comment. Now, one of the things we may want to talk about, consider, is adopting rules for public comment. This commission can do it to keep some order to public comment. For example, you can put reasonable time limits on public comment.
Well, we have 5 minutes. And we grant that.
Have we adopted that rule, Red?
Yeah.
Well, we'll look at that. We'll look into it. But I just want you to be aware that, typically you see public comment at the city council, but it applies to any public body.
Yeah, well, usually when somebody gives a comment, the safest way is just to thank the person for coming up and giving the information and leave it go at that, right?
Right. But
don't have
if
to
they
answer.
want to verbally say something, under the Open Meetings Act, they have the right to do that.
Right. But you can just say thank you for your comment and leave it go at that. You don't
Okay.
have to respond to that.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And that's why I was saying there is no responsibility to respond. And just like Roy said, a very courteous way is to say thank you and move on.
Well, and one other thing is that I've seen in some communities, the public may make a comment, say in a public hearing, they'll make a comment about something, it'll be a question. And this is something or they'll dispute, something that maybe staff said, or maybe something that the applicant said. And this is something where, as a commission, you have the ability to, if you want some more information from staff or from the applicant, then you can ask those questions. But in my opinion, it's never been helpful to try and debate something with someone who's making a comment, or if an applicant, if you disagree with the statement that is being made, that's something that you can discuss perhaps in your deliberations, because you want to make sure that all the facts are being communicated between you, but it's never been very productive to just have the discussion with having that interaction. So just something to think about. And then if you need clarification, certainly you can ask questions from the public or from the applicant to make sure that you're understanding what their concern is, or if they dispute something, why they believe, or if they have proof for why that's false, those types of things.
And then the last thing, and coming into the home stretch, is this Open Meetings Act training. I don't know if anybody has done this, but it is a requirement under the Open Meetings Act. I know some of you served on other bodies. Each appointed and elected official of a public body is required to do this Open Meetings Act training. I'm giving you on here the citation, the website that you go to do the training. And up there it says it has to be completed no longer than the 90th day after the oath of office. If you haven't taken the training, I'm guessing the new members haven't taken the training yet. We have to take the training. And actually, it's pretty informative. It tells you everything you want to know about the Open Meetings Act. But that's where you go, to that website to complete it. You get a certificate, and then you'll give that certificate to Shirley Siebert, who's the clerk, and she'll put it in her file.
You can give it to me as well, and then I can make sure that Shirley gets that for her records.
Okay. So that's all I have. Does any member have a question? That's what we're here for, opening it up? Or if we did just such a bang-up job?
Did you touch on the Freedom of Information Act?
We didn't, but I can talk about that.
Yeah.
So Roy mentions FOIA. Basically what FOIA is anyone can send in a request to the city, and we would like requests to come directly to the FOIA officer, who is Ms. Siebert, but sometimes that doesn't happen. People don't follow that procedure. Under FOIA, they're not required to, as long as they send an email. It could be as simple as an email, even to one of you. Make sure you forward it on to Shirley, okay? Because Shirley needs to know. She's the point person for all the FOIAs that come in. So we want them all funneled through Shirley, because there's time frames to respond to a FOIA. And generally what the law says is if a request comes in, public body must respond within 5 business days and provide the information, so long as it's not exempt, not covered under an exemption. That may happen. And oftentimes we get, and I help all my communities with the FOIAs, we'll get requests for emails, we'll get requests for records, any sort of records involving any public official, so just be cognizant, particularly with email. As a general rule, and again there's exceptions, email is subject to full public disclosure. Okay, so just be, when you're crafting an email, and just be aware this could be seen by everybody in the community. Is there any other items on FOIA you'd like me to address, Roy?
No, there's one thing that, at the last seminar I was at, if you're sitting up there in a dais and you start playing with your cell phone or texting somebody, that could be part of the record of this.
Right, so Roy brings up, this is a very recent case, actually. Typically, your personal cell phone and text messages that go from your personal cell phone when you're out in the community are not, even though you're on the CDC, they are not subject to FOIA. There is an exception. A recent case came down where members on, I want to say it was Champaign, on their city council, were texting on their private phones to each other up on the dais. And what the court said is, if it happens with your private phone in the public meeting, that is subject to FOIA. So, you know, again, as a general rule, your private cell phone is not subject to FOIA unless you bring it in and are using it in a public meeting in that fashion.
What exemptions would there be for FOIA?
Well, for email, there's a couple that apply. One, particularly for staff emails, is what's called the deliberative process exemption. So for example, if two staff are emailing between each other and they're trying to come up with a policy or action on, let's say, a construction project, and they're saying, hey, what do you think we should do? I think we should do this, but here's the pros and cons of going that route. Here's my recommendation, here's my opinion on it. That can be exempt under the deliberative process, because what the legislature has said is we want to encourage frank dialogue between staff to come up with solutions to problems. Now, there's an exception to that. Let's say you're talking about a development plan, and everybody's giving their 2 cents on, oh, I think this is a good development plan, I think this development plan is bad for these reasons, and then the city council eventually approves the development plan. Once that plan is approved, all those emails about the development plan are now open to FOIA.
And I will also say that anything that comes before this commission, the staff memo, the application from the applicant, that is all subject to FOIA. So while we don't put the application in the packet, we keep it in the file. If somebody were to want to take a look at that, that would be available. Personal information is redacted from that, but largely anything that comes before you is all subject to FOIA. So the plans that you see, anybody can come in and take a look at or get a copy of, where normally if somebody were to come in and request, want a building permit, and they weren't going through this public process, then those stamped plans are actually not releasable under FOIA, unless it's for the individual property owner for whatever reason, but those are copyrighted materials.
What about executive session? Is that
For the
also
for this
for
body?
FOIA? Well, anybody. would
No,
be-
executive session minutes are not subject to FOIA. They're confidential.
What about with this body?
Yes, they're also confidential. So, unless the public body has made a decision to release those minutes as being non-confidential.
But they're still all recorded, correct?
Oh, yes. Yeah. And we have
Years
gotten,
before they
I've
destroy 'em.
handled requests for executive session minutes. And I've said, no, you can't have those, and I've been brought up to the PAC, and the PAC has said, no, you can't have those. So that's black letter law.
Is there any other questions?
Well, I will end by saying that we do intend to make sure that everybody has adequate resources. I know that for our new members, we haven't had an opportunity to give you the UDO just yet. The codifier is working on actually incorporating the most recent amendments, and so we do need to make sure that the information that the rest of you have is also up to date. But if there's, and one of the things that Sean and I were talking about is while you do have the presentation tonight, we do hope to get some additional information for you so that you can refer to it as you need to. We'll have to look at, I think we were talking about doing some maybe Cliff's Notes version of the Roberts Rules, just for some easy reference. And then maybe some identification of different code sections that might be helpful for you, things like that. So we'll look at getting that pulled together. But unfortunately, it most likely will not be before we meet next, because our next meeting, as you all know, is Monday. And we have 4 items on the agenda there. But before we go, one of the things that, and we've not really had a special meeting since I've been here, aside from this one, but I do want to make sure that everyone understands that a special meeting, you can only discuss the item for which the meeting was called. So you cannot discuss anything other than what the purpose of that meeting was intended for originally.
And just to sort of piggyback on that, clarify it, discussion on matters not on the agenda is allowed. Action on a matter that's not on the agenda is not allowed. So if an item comes up and you just want to discuss it and it's not on the agenda, there's no issue with the Open Meetings Act. You cannot take action on that item because that item must be on the agenda. The other thing I want to note is, and maybe you all know this, you can get the city code online. It's on Sterling Codifiers, and maybe we can send the link around to all the commissioners. The only thing I'll caution you on that is when we do text amendments, they're not going to be on Sterling, but what Sterling does, which is kind of nice, is it'll say, if you're looking at a section online, it'll say, hey, there's a new ordinance that was just passed, and you can click on a link and it'll bring you to the new ordinance. So that's another place you can look for all the zoning provisions in the city. That's all I have.
Well, I want to thank you and everybody. It was a very informative session tonight, and I think it cleared up a lot of questions we had, and I think it'll keep us out of trouble. Okay, I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Need a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carried. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Roger's not synchronized.
We should go up.